Hi guys, welcome back. I am the geezer for the visa. Today we're talking about the mandatory criteria for the global talent visa. It's the foundation on any endorsement application under the global talent visa, so you need to make sure you get it right. My name is Amr Zaman. I am a solicitor of over 14 years and I have extensive experience when it comes to global talent applications. We've conducted hundreds of consultations, submitted hundreds of applications in the past, and I want to kind of enlighten you guys and advise you guys and give you some value when it comes to the endorsement application to TechNation in the digital technology field. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So first things first, the most obvious thing, the mandatory criteria is not optional. It's mandatory. You have to cover it. If you don't cover it, your application for the endorsement is going to fail. It's as simple as that. The amount of times clients have come to me and they said, Amr, the mandatory criteria, I don't think I can meet it. Can we skip it? And I'm thinking, do they need to introduce the English criterion to this process? Because how do you not grasp the fact that the mandatory criteria is not optional? So we need to make sure that when it comes to your endorsement application, the mandatory criteria is covered. The mandatory criteria is essentially where other people recognize your talents. That's what you have to show. You need to be able to show through your recommendation letters or even through the 10 pieces of evidence that you meet the mandatory criteria by best showcasing your skills. And it's not just enough to say, I'm good at my job. It's other people recognizing your talent and having an impact or adding value to the space that you're in. So it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm good. Well, okay, everyone thinks they're good, but what do other people think of you? And that's what is at the crux of the mandatory criteria. So a lot of clients, when they come to me, the first thing they ask is like, what does the mandatory criteria require of you? And it's about recognizing talent. It's as simple as that. It's someone that says, yep, this guy is the guy, or this person is the person who is producing the most amount of impact in this industry or value in the space. And now when it comes to the global talent process, especially the endorsement, we're looking at it from two perspectives. So the first perspective is exceptional talent. So from an exceptional talent point of view, you've had a career where you've been recognized for the talent that you have. And then you have exceptional promise. So this is someone with a shorter career of less than 5 years, someone new to the industry, who's been recognized as someone who has the potential to become a real talent in that space. So that's the two things that we need to kind of think about when it comes to whether are you in the talent criteria or are you in the promise criteria. And remember, in the last video, I outlined who would be considered as someone of exceptional promise and who would be considered as someone with exceptional talent. But it's being either recognized as someone who is talented or someone who has the potential to become a real talent and a real leader in their field. So that's what it means when it comes to this mandatory criteria. So then we move on to, well, what does recognition mean? Like, what are TechNation looking for when they ask for recognition of your work from other people? Well, that's just it. We need people outside of your work to recognize your talent. You could be selected for important projects. You may have had published journals or articles. You may have been invited to a speaking engagement for the impact and the value that you've added in that particular sector. So when it comes to recognition of your work, it needs to be outside your work. It can't be, your line manager. I mean, it can be, but for the document to have real kind of significance, it would be ideal if it's outside of your work. If it's come from someone who you've collaborated with, maybe a JV, maybe a client, someone outside of your immediate scope of work has recognized you for the work that you've done. So this is what you would need to look for when it comes to recognition. Outside of your workplace, you've been selected, you've been asked to adjudicate, speaking panel, This is what they're looking for when it comes to recognition. So this is what you should gear your evidence towards when looking at the mandatory criteria. One of the key things that TechNation as an endorsing body looks for is not just participation. They don't want to see you were part of a team that built something which was innovative. They want to see that you led, that you were a leader on this project, that you significantly contributed to this innovative project. That's what they're looking for. If you're just showing participation, well, that doesn't mean you are exceptionally talented. You might be good at your job, but are you a talent? Are you exceptional? Not with participation. You need to show that you are a leader, someone who regularly contributed, someone who was recognized for the value that you as an individual added to that project. That's what they're looking for, and that's something TechNation will immediately ask you, or they won't ask you, but they will expect that to be in your endorsement application. So this is a key part of meeting the mandatory criteria, and something you really need to look out for when applying. So remember, you have the exceptional talent and you have the exceptional promise. So this is important when it comes to understanding what kind of evidences you want to put forward. So if you're someone who is in the exceptional promise side of things, yes, you may not have had a leadership role, but the impact or the contribution that you made to the project could be important. And if you're coming from the exceptional talent point of view, well, then you're looking at someone who was maybe a project manager or a senior executive on that project, and it's really, either commercially or as a product or as a service, it was innovative and really added to the space in terms of its innovation. So depending on which angle you're coming from, the evidence needs to match. So if it's a career of less than 5 years, it's promise. If it's a career of over 5 years, then you're looking at talent. And that's what you need to keep in your mind when you're making an application for endorsement. So what are strong pieces of evidences that you could submit? Well, your recognition could come from media. So, for example, if there's any journals or if there are magazines that publish on what's going on in your industry, and you've been picked up by one of the reporters or one of the writers as someone who's been contributing to this project, that would immediately stand out as a strong piece of evidence. You may have won an award if you have been involved in something which has really added or been very innovative to that space. You may have won an award which you've been recognized for as someone who contributed significantly or led the project. That is again something that can recognize you as a talent and can be a strong piece of evidence. You may have been asked to participate in a speaking engagement on that project. So it could be something that's been set up by external organizers, or even if it's within your organization, but you are presenting to third parties or external participants, being asked to engage and speak with your audience on this project or the work that you've done is another strong piece of evidence that you can provide to show that you've been recognized as a talent in your field. So these are kind of three strong pieces of evidences that you can provide to help support your endorsement application when it comes to the mandatory criteria. Other evidences, which may not be as strong but still can be important, is your salary. So, for example, if you've worked on a project and you are commanding a high salary, this will definitely help impact your endorsement application. So employment contracts or payslips or an employment letter will definitely help. So other evidences that you can provide is the impact your project or your product or your service has had, and you can show this through the growth of that product. So for example, if you've taken it from the development stage to launch, and now your product or service or whatever it is has, I don't know, 10,000 users or 50,000 users or 100,000 users, to show that growth in terms of the end user is something that you can also rely on. And don't forget, there's a lot of people that are on GitHub where they can really showcase some projects or some products and services, and you can use that evidence as recognition as well. So these are 5, 6, 7 pieces of evidences that you can rely on when it comes to recognition as a talent for the mandatory criteria. So those were some of the strong pieces of evidences you can provide. Now, what are the weak evidences you can provide? Well, one of them is job descriptions. The amount of times I have seen in an application someone providing job description. And like I said, it doesn't help because that's just what's expected of you. That doesn't mean you've done anything. So providing a job description from your employment contract or from a HR document really will not help support your application. I've also seen people provide attendance certificates from courses they've been on. Again, that doesn't show recognition for your work. That just means that you attended a seminar or an event where you had no kind of real involvement in. There's no participation, there's no engagement, there's no recognition of your work. You're just there to listen to other people. And that really doesn't help when it comes to relying on the mandatory criteria. And one other piece of weak evidence is that I've seen people provide as part of the application are generic employment letters. X worked for X, commanding a salary of X. He was, or she was, or they were a great employee. That's it. Well, how does that recognize you as a talent? So we really need to manage our expectations in terms of the evidences that we provide as what they show. And if there is a real lack of recognition within that document, it's not going to fly, and you're just going to be disappointed at the end of that process. So these are 2 or 3 kind of examples of weak pieces of evidences that you shouldn't be looking to provide when it comes to the mandatory criteria. So if you've got some of the stronger evidences or you have other evidences which you're not entirely sure whether they are strong or weak, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. So the first thing is, what is the document? What's it trying to prove? Who has issued it? These are 3 important questions you need to ask, because if you can't satisfy yourself or answer those 3 questions credibly, then how are you expecting someone at Tech Nation to approve or to think, yes, this person has met the mandatory criteria? So those are the 3 important questions you need to ask when it comes to considering what evidences you want to put forward. And then a couple of other things you need to think about is, okay, what does the document prove? So I've got the objective side of this. I know who issued it. I know what it is. But what does it prove? What does it attest to? So this is something you need to ask. And then finally, you need to ask yourself, does it show leadership? Does it show, or does it imply that I have been recognized as a talent because I significantly contributed or that I was a leader on this project? If it doesn't, you need to really think twice about putting that in. So these are like really 4 or 5 things that you need to think about. The first 3 are objective. It's kind of like a very short answer. It's a yes or a no, or it's a very definitive kind of response. But then the next 2 are kind of subjective. And that's where you really need to be honest and real with yourself. You know, what does it prove? Does it show I'm a talent? Does it recognize me as a talent? Does it show my leadership skills? Because if it doesn't, then it's not a document that's going to help when it comes to the mandatory criteria. So again, when we've had these consultations with prospective applicants for the Global Talent Visa endorsement, we've had people think that, oh, because I'm a senior executive, it's enough for me to show that I should be endorsed or that I've been recognized as a leader in my field. Unfortunately, no, that's not how it works. What they're actually looking for is the who, the what, the why. So who has recognized you? That's what they're looking for, not your title. What have you achieved? Not your title. And does it matter to digital technology? That is what Tech Nation is looking for. So your title, you might be the VP, CEO, CFO, CTO, whatever C-suite examples there are, or titles, or positions, that will not help your application. Like I said, it's the who, the what, the why. That's what you need to think about. And that's something which sometimes a lot of applicants feel a bit offended by, to be honest. But again, we're not here to boost egos. We're here to make sure that your application for an endorsement is successful. So these are things that you again need to think about when it comes to the mandatory criteria and how you can meet it. And I keep banging on about this, but value, impact, those are important and key parts of the whole application. So that's what you need to have in the back of your mind when you're considering the mandatory criteria or even the optional criteria as well. So just to circle back in terms of being able to demonstrate that you meet the mandatory criteria, we're looking for recommendation letters, we're looking for awards, we're looking at metrics that can be provided in terms of commercial growth. These are the things that you want to provide, maybe some employment contract or an employment letter which goes to or attests your salary. These are the kind of documents that you need to think about when it comes to applying for the endorsement and specifically the mandatory criteria, because without these documents, I don't know if it's going to be enough to get past the mandatory criteria. And like I said at the beginning and in one of the previous videos, the mandatory criteria is the foundation of any application for an endorsement. So if you're not strong here, it's going to be really difficult to recover when you get through to the optional criteria. So make sure your evidence is strong when it comes to this part of the endorsement application. So I'd like to think what I've just gone through is more in terms of the theory. Okay, so it's like me telling you exactly what you need, how you need to provide it, what will impress Technation. But I want to give some practical examples to you in terms of actual roles that people have had who we've had successful endorsement applications for. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a software developer. So how did we meet the mandatory criteria for him? He had built an open source tool which was used by many people. We were able to show the growth using the metrics from their CRM and their case management systems, which really showed the impact that he had had. He then had engagement through GitHub, and he was invited to speak on a panel. Now, the panel, the audience for that panel wasn't huge, but he was asked to come to provide explanations and engagement with their audience who were asking questions. And this really was able to be presented to Technation through that. So for the speaking engagement, we provided evidence of the invitation, we had screenshots of the engagement on GitHub, and we provided the metrics for the tool being used by its users. And we showed month on month the increase in those numbers. So that was enough for the software developer. Another client that we had that I can give you an example of was a founder. Now, this founder was based in the US. He was a founder of a product-led technology company. He was able to grow the business, both in terms of its product offerings, its commercials, and again, we relied on the metrics. And he was recognized by the media in his specific field. So there were a lot of journals relating to this space where it was picked up that he had actually brought forward to that space a company which had some innovation, but it was more about the growth of the company which he got recognized for. And we were able to rely on those evidences for the mandatory criteria. And the optional criteria, which I'll go into later videos, were also met, and he successfully applied for the endorsement. So it doesn't just need to be someone who is physically building out the product or the service like a software developer. It can be someone who has led the company, who has made a significant contribution from a business perspective, but most importantly, it's a product-led technology company. It can't be a delivery company, because delivery will not show your talents, and that's something Technation are very keen to kind of not endorse. Sorry. So you need to make sure it is a product-led company, not service-led. So some of the questions that again come up in consultations, which I want to highlight with you guys, so that it kind of gives you an understanding of what people are thinking. It may be questions that you've not thought of, but now if I go through them, it may trigger some kind of other questions that you may have. But one of the first questions that we get when it comes to the mandatory criteria and the evidences is, can my employer write a recommendation letter? Yes, they can. That's the short answer. But what we want to go back to is recognition. And strong recognition comes outside of your work. It comes outside of the scope of your work, your team, your leadership team. So it's better if it comes from someone who is outside of your work. But yes, you can rely on a letter from your employer. Another question is, I don't have any awards. Can I still apply? And again, the answer is yes, of course you can still apply, because it's not definitive in terms of what evidences you provide. If you don't have awards, but you've been recognized through the media, well, then those articles can be just as important as awards. So don't feel like if you don't have an award, well, then you can't be successful with your endorsement application or being able to rely on that media recognition for the mandatory criteria. If I command a high salary, will that be enough? If we're looking in just isolation, no, it can't be enough, because it doesn't attest to you being recognized as a leader. But if we have an employment contract which shows a salary of, I don't know, let's say £150,000 per year, plus some shares or equity in the business, and you have media recognition, and you've been invited to attend a speaking engagement on external event organizers, then yes, the high salary definitely helps. So it's not about looking at documents or criteria in isolation. We have to provide a more rounded assessment. And that's my advice for any kind of evidence that you provide. Is it enough to rely just on media awards? No, it's not. Is it just enough to rely on high salaries? No, it's not. But with other pieces of evidences, it can be. So that would be my advice. Make a rounded assessment of the evidences you have. So that brings us to the end of this video. I again hope it's been helpful to you. The mandatory criteria is the foundation of any endorsement application. So it's really important that you get into understanding exactly what you need to provide when it comes to evidences. And I hope I've been able to give you examples that can help you meet this criteria, because it can be tricky, because you might think, okay, the example of media recognition works best in another criteria, but you have the others. For example, you may have speaking engagements, you may have awards, or you may be a judge on a panel for a university who provides innovative ideas. And it's all about ensuring that you best showcase your skills. So if you think it doesn't quite meet one criteria, or you have too much evidence for one criteria, it may be helpful to move it across to one of the optional criterias. But I hope it's been helpful. It's been a bit long. I'm not going to lie, we've gone on for a while, but it's very important to make sure that you get the right information. So remember to like, follow, share, because you want to be notified on when the next video comes out. Because like I said, this is a series. So the next video will talk about the first optional criteria, and I'll go through each one individually so that you can have real insight into which one you want to choose when it comes to your endorsement application. So once again, guys, thank you very much. Keep an eye on the geezer for the visa. He'll always have some news for you.